You know, every living thing on this planet, from the tiniest microbe to the biggest whale, plays by a certain set of biological rules. It's a script that dictates how populations grow, how they stabilize, and how they fall. But what about us? Have we somehow managed to write our own rules? Or are we just an exception that's about to run out of time?
So to get to the bottom of this, here's what we're going to do. We'll start with the absolute basics, the building blocks of nature. Then we'll get into the universal rules that govern how all species grow. We'll take a look at what a normal population life story looks like, and only then are we going to turn the microscope on ourselves to see just how different our story is, and what that might mean for all of us.
All right, first things first. Before we can even start to talk about the huge picture of global populations, we got to make sure we're all speaking the same language. So let's start at the very beginning. What exactly is a population?
And it's a really simple but super important idea. See, a population isn't just any old group of animals. It has to be the same species, all living and interacting in the same general area. So think about the squirrels you see in a single park, or, hey, all the people living in your town. That's a population. And from there, you can see how everything kind of builds on itself. You start with those individuals, right? They form a population. Then you bring in populations of other species, the birds, the trees, the insects, and suddenly you've got a community. And when you add in all the non-living stuff like the water, the sunlight, the soil, boom, that's your whole ecosystem.
Okay, so we've got the building blocks down, but what are the actual forces at play here? What makes these populations get bigger or smaller? Well, it turns out it all boils down to some pretty simple math.
I like to think of it like a bank account, honestly. It's all about what's coming in and what's going out. Births and immigration, those are your deposits. They add to the total number. And deaths and immigration, that's when individuals leave, those are your withdrawals. It's the balance between these four things that tells you if a population's growing, shrinking, or just staying the same.
But here's the thing. No population can just grow forever. It's impossible. Nature always has, well, it has breaks. We call them limiting factors. And this is stuff like, running out of food, more predators showing up, disease spreading around, or just plain old competition for a place to live. These are the natural checks and balances that stop any one species from completely taking over.
So when you put it all together, that simple math of ins and outs, plus those environmental breaks, something really cool happens. A super predictable pattern starts to emerge. It's almost like a standard life story that plays out for nearly every population on Earth.
So what does that pattern actually look like? If you were to plot it out on a graph over time, what kind of shape would you see?
You get this. This is the sigmoid, or what most people call the S-shaped curve. This is the classic textbook journey of a population. Let's break down what's actually going on in each of these four phases.
So everything kicks off with phase A, the lag phase, and it's exactly what it sounds like, a slow start. The population is maybe new to the area, the numbers are low, they just need some time to get their bearings, mature, and settle in before the real growth can begin.
And then, the boom. We hit phase B, the exponential phase. Now everything is perfect. There's tons of food, not many predators, and all the space they could want. Without any of those limiting factors to slow things down, the population just explodes. It's growing as fast as it possibly can.
But yeah, that party can't last forever, right? In phase C, the stationary phase, reality starts to bite back. Those limiting factors we mentioned, food starts getting scarce, competition gets fierce, they start to kick in. The birth rate slows down, the death rate goes up, and eventually, they balance out. The growth just stops, and the population hits a plateau.
And finally, if the population really overshoots what the environment can handle, you hit phase D, the death phase. Resources become so incredibly scarce that deaths start to outnumber births, and the population actually starts to decline. Okay, so that's the standard story for pretty much every species out there. Now, for the million-dollar question, what about us? Do we follow that same predictable S-shaped curve?
Right now, we're looking at a global population of well over 7.5 billion people. It's a number that's just hard to wrap your head around. But what does that growth actually look like when you map it out?
Yeah, that does not look like an S-curve, does it? This thing is called a J-curve, and it's basically a straight line going up. We had a super long lag phase for most of human history, and then, boom, we hit that exponential growth phase and just never stopped. It looks like we completely skipped the part where things are supposed to level off. How on earth is that even possible?
Well, what it comes down to is this.
we figured out how to remove nature's brakes. On one side, you have all the things that should have slowed us down: disease, famine, war. But on the other side, you have our inventions. Things like medicine, sanitation, better food, better housing. We basically went down the list and systematically dismantled the very things that are supposed to keep a population in check.
And we pulled this off in a few key stages. First, about 10,000 BC, you have the agricultural revolution. Suddenly, we had way more food. Fast forward to the 1700s, and the Industrial Revolution gives us machinery and better housing, which meant people could support bigger families. And then around 1900, the Medical Revolution. Sanitation, vaccines, modern medicine, it just slashed the death rate. With every single one of these steps, we just kept pushing the ceiling of our population higher and higher.
So the takeaway here is pretty clear, right? Our own ingenuity has allowed us to bend and maybe even break the rules of nature. We've managed to stay in that wild, exponential growth phase for centuries now. But what are the consequences of that kind of unchecked success?
I mean, if you look at it from a purely biological standpoint, we are the most successful species ever. This quote really nails it. We're distributed worldwide. There are a ton of us, and we completely dominate other species. But as you can probably guess, that kind of dominance comes with a pretty hefty price tag. And here's the bill. To support all these billions of people, you need a staggering amount of resources. We're talking about massive deforestation just to get wood and create farmland. We're burning incredible amounts of fossil fuels, which of course is driving climate change. We're destroying habitats all over the planet. And we're even putting a huge strain on our own systems, like healthcare and education. And all of this leads to one big, unsettling question. That S-curve, the one that levels off, that happens when a species finally hits the limits of its environment. We've avoided that limit so far by changing the environment itself to fit our needs. But what happens when we can't change it anymore? What happens when we finally hit a wall that we can't engineer our way around? What does the next part of our growth curve look like then?